What unfolds when one of Hollywood's most celebrated actresses arrives for what is supposed to be a calm, predictable television appearance and instead finds herself at the center of one of the most volatile moments daytime TV has ever aired? Viewers witnessed an exchange that instantly shifted from casual promotion to open hostility, as Meryl Streep methodically tore apart Joy Behar in front of a live audience on The View. The atmosphere turned electric, the kind of unscripted television executives quietly dread but audiences never forget. It was raw, uncomfortable, and impossible to look away from, the kind of moment that becomes etched into broadcast history. The morning began without any warning signs. Meryl Streep had been invited to promote her latest film, a booking the producers believed would deliver polite conversation, thoughtful insight, and smooth publicity. Known throughout the industry for her poise and professionalism, the award-winning actress took her seat as the cameras went live and the familiar theme faded out. Across the table, Joy Behar wore the knowing expression longtime viewers recognized immediately, a look that suggested she was already planning to provoke. The other panelists, including Whoopi Goldberg and Sarah Haynes, settled in, expecting the usual rhythm of light questions and friendly banter. Joy leaned forward and opened the discussion with thinly disguised sarcasm. She referenced the new movie, suggesting that its premise felt recycled and implied that the industry might be scraping the bottom of the creative barrel. The remark landed sharply, even by Joy's standards. Quick glances were exchanged among the hosts as Meryl absorbed the jab without outward reaction. She responded calmly, offering a measured explanation about storytelling, shared human experiences, and the importance of revisiting themes that remain relevant through changing times. Her tone was polite, controlled, and deliberately neutral. That restraint only seemed to fuel Joy further. She waved off the explanation and launched into a much harsher critique, claiming Meryl had built her career by repeating the same emotional performance over and over. She mocked the familiar elements of grief, tears, and intensity, suggesting audiences were exhausted by it all. The studio noise dropped almost instantly. Crew members slowed their movements, sensing something had gone wrong. Whoopi shifted in her chair, clearly uneasy, while Sarah suddenly became absorbed in her notes. Meryl's expression remained composed, but her eyes hardened. She spoke evenly, countering that vulnerability and emotional honesty were the core of meaningful art. She emphasized that portraying human struggle was not a weakness but a responsibility of storytelling. Joy scoffed loudly, dismissing the idea and escalating the attack. She accused Meryl of riding on reputation rather than merit, implying awards and praise were handed out automatically simply because of her name. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and accusatory, as the cameras continued rolling. What followed no longer resembled debate. It felt personal and aggressive. Meryl calmly placed her glass on the table and addressed Joy directly, pointing out the absurdity of suggesting decades of disciplined craft could be reduced to industry favoritism. Her voice stayed steady, but there was unmistakable force beneath the politeness. She highlighted the difference between criticizing from the sidelines and dedicating a life to mastering a demanding art form. Joy bristled, firing back that expertise was not required to recognize mediocrity and asserting her long history in the entertainment world as justification. Meryl responded with surgical precision. She acknowledged Joy's television career, and contrasted it with the demands of acting, explaining that true performance requires exposure, emotional risk, and relentless discipline. She made it clear that offering loud opinions from behind a desk was not the same as standing in front of a camera, stripped of protection, and telling difficult truths through character. The words landed hard. The other hosts began to intervene, attempting to redirect the discussion toward the film itself, but the damage was already done. Joy refused to retreat. She accused Meryl of arrogance and entitlement, mocking her accolades in past roles. The insult crossed a line. Meryl's restraint finally slipped, just enough to reveal her frustration. She called out what she described as manufactured outrage and shallow commentary, pointing to the irony of being lectured on authenticity by someone whose public persona thrived on provocation rather than understanding. She spoke about real artists creating meaningful work while others built careers critiquing things they barely grasped. Silence followed. The audience stopped murmuring. Joy opened her mouth, then closed it, momentarily stripped of her trademark retort. The tension was so thick it seemed to freeze the entire studio. Camera operators hesitated, unsure whether to cut away or continue documenting what felt like a complete collapse of the show's usual structure. Sarah made one last attempt to soften the moment, gently remarking on how art resonates differently with everyone, but the atmosphere remained fractured, the fallout already inevitable. And no, Meryl cut in smoothly, her tone controlled yet unyielding. She said that Joy had already made her stance unmistakably obvious. In her view, years of discipline, education, and refined craft apparently counted for nothing when compared to personal opinions delivered from a place of ease and security. Meryl remarked that the idea itself was oddly fascinating, the belief that criticism without knowledge somehow transformed into wisdom. The studio absorbed the weight of her words as they settled into the air. Joy Behar quickly snapped back, her voice sharper and more defensive than her usual biting confidence. She insisted she did not need lectures about understanding, claiming she had been watching films long before Meryl ever considered acting. She declared that what she saw was an actress who believed herself immune to criticism. Meryl let out a short laugh, devoid of warmth. She replied that she had faced criticism from some of the most perceptive minds in film and theater, people who understood what they were analyzing. Those critics spoke in terms of technique, emotional honesty, and the connection between script and performance. What Joy offered, Meryl stated, were personal jabs masquerading as professional analysis. The impact was immediate. Joy's face flushed as the realization hit that her entire method of commentary had just been dismantled on live television in front of millions. Instead of retreating or conceding even a fraction of the point, she lunged forward verbally, her voice trembling with anger. She accused Meryl of making things personal, then launched into a tirade about watching her dominate Hollywood for decades while pretending to deliver high art. She dismissed Meryl's performances as little more than exaggerated voices and posturing, sneering that she was no great icon and certainly no legend. The studio sank into complete silence, broken only by the low hum of equipment. Whoopi Goldberg pressed her hand against her forehead, visibly distressed, while Sarah Haynes looked as though she wished the desk could swallow her whole. In the control room, producers scrambled, uncertain whether they were witnessing a catastrophe or capturing the most riveting television moment of their careers. Meryl leaned back in her chair, and for a brief instant it seemed she might choose restraint and bring the exchange to an end. Instead, she folded her hands calmly and spoke with a quiet intensity that demanded absolute attention. She said she was about to do something no one else in Joy's life had apparently dared to do, which was to speak plainly and truthfully. Her voice remained steady, but it carried unmistakable fire. She stated that Joy had built a career on intentional provocation because genuine insight required effort, discipline, and intellectual integrity. She accused Joy of mistaking loudness for authority and controversy for importance. Joy's mouth fell open as she attempted to interrupt, but Meryl pressed on without hesitation. She addressed the comparison that had been made earlier, bringing up Katharine Hepburn. Meryl described Hepburn as fearless, intelligent, and principled, someone who challenged power rather than attacking fellow artists striving to create meaningful work. She contrasted that legacy with Joy's career, which she described as built on cheap shots and shallow observations. She concluded that the difference between them went beyond talent and rested firmly in character. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Joy's complexion drained of color, and for the first time in her long tenure on The View, she appeared truly lost for words. The other hosts remained frozen, uncertain whether to step in or allow the confrontation to reach its natural end. When Joy finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, laced with disbelief and wounded pride. Meryl responded with raised brows, clarifying that the show did not belong to any single person. She stated that it belonged to all the hosts and, more importantly, to the viewers who tuned in expecting meaningful discussion rather than petty hostility aimed at guests. She continued by addressing the subject of humiliation, explaining that public embarrassment often stemmed from a lack of substance rather than from being challenged with honesty. Joy tried to reclaim her footing by declaring that she created conversation and dialogue, insisting that she raised issues others avoided. Meryl countered firmly, stating that there was a clear difference between thoughtful inquiry and cheap provocation. She explained that genuine discussion about her work would involve her process, her creative decisions, and the themes she explored. What Joy had chosen instead was insult dressed up as commentary. Meryl stated plainly that such behavior did not qualify as journalism, nor did it even rise to the level of compelling entertainment. She described it simply as cruelty. Whoopi finally attempted to regain control of the moment, urging everyone to pause and breathe. The tension, however, remained thick and unresolved. Joy, still reeling from being so openly confronted, appeared driven beyond composure, her emotions spilling over as the confrontation edged toward its breaking point. "You know what, Meryl," Joy snapped, her voice dripping with contempt. "If you want to talk about cruelty, then cruelty is watching someone at your stage of life still trying to portray innocence on screen. Cruelty is pretending that every role you take on is a flawless work of art when it is painfully obvious to anyone paying attention that you are repeating the same performance again and again, just wrapped in new wardrobes and accents." The remark was so harsh and deeply personal that even the camera operators shifted uneasily behind their lenses. Sarah let out a soft gasp without realizing it, and Whoopi slowly shook her head, stunned by how far the exchange had gone. Meryl did not respond the way anyone expected. Instead of firing back, her lips curved into a small, controlled smile. She thanked Joy in a calm, almost gentle tone, explaining that Joy had just illustrated her argument more effectively than any speech ever could. Turning her gaze directly toward the camera, she addressed the viewers at home, saying that what they were witnessing was the result of someone being confronted with the limits of their own understanding. Rather than responding with reflection or professional dialogue, the response had become an attack focused on age and appearance. Joy immediately realized she had stepped straight into a trap of her own making. She tried to soften her words, stumbling over an explanation, but Meryl cut her off with quiet authority. She stated plainly that Joy had meant every word, and that intention revealed everything necessary about her character and her credibility as a critic. Meryl pointed out that attacking a woman's age was not sharp commentary, nor was it bold or insightful. She described it as ageism repackaged as critique, used in an attempt to appear provocative and relevant. Joy's composure visibly crumbled. The confidence that usually carried her through confrontations vanished, replaced by agitation and defensiveness. She tried to assert seniority, implying that longevity alone gave her authority. Meryl responded firmly that time alone did not equal quality. She said it simply meant repeating the same errors for a longer span. She added that if this behavior represented Joy's idea of professionalism after so many years, then it might be time for serious self-examination. The rest of the panel sat frozen. Joy struggled to steady herself, her face flushed and her hands trembling slightly. For the first time since joining The View, she appeared genuinely exposed. Any sympathy that moment might have earned her had already been erased by the cruelty of her earlier remarks. Sarah made one last attempt to redirect the conversation toward the film and its themes, hoping to salvage something from the wreckage. Meryl rose from her chair instead. She said calmly that enough had been said for one day. Joy, she explained, had made it abundantly clear that personal insults mattered more to her than thoughtful discussion, and there was no value in continuing under those circumstances. Joy protested weakly, insisting that Meryl could not simply walk away mid-interview. Meryl paused and looked down at her, her expression holding something close to pity. She explained that the interview had ended the moment it became personal, and what remained was Joy humiliating herself on national television while Meryl attempted to preserve dignity for them both. The studio fell into an eerie stillness, broken only by the soft hum of the air system. Meryl stood composed and unshaken while Joy slumped in her seat, the consequences of the confrontation slowly settling in. The other hosts looked like witnesses to an unavoidable disaster, unable to intervene yet unable to look away. Joy made one last attempt to regain control, accusing Meryl of leaving because she could not handle real scrutiny. Meryl stopped, one hand resting on the back of her chair, then slowly turned around. The look in her eyes was cold and unyielding. She stated that real scrutiny involved standards and accountability. She returned to her seat, leaning forward with intense focus, and explained what genuine examination looked like. She spoke about responsibility, about the weight that came with having a platform, and about the difference between challenging someone's work and tearing down their humanity. She emphasized that professionalism demanded substance, not hostility. Whoopi tried once more to intervene, urging a pause, but Meryl held her ground without raising her voice. She said Joy had wanted seriousness, and seriousness required confronting behavior, not deflecting it. She spoke about ethics, about the obligation to elevate conversation rather than poison it, and about the clear line between inquiry and intimidation. Joy finally responded, but her voice lacked strength. She insisted she was not cruel, only direct, and that people sometimes reacted poorly to hard conversations. Meryl shook her head slowly and explained that being disliked for thoughtful critique was not the same as being disliked for needless cruelty. One reflected journalism, the other reflected misconduct wrapped in a television contract. The cameras kept rolling as Joy searched desperately for words, her usual sharpness gone. She glanced around the table, silently hoping for rescue, but Sarah stared down at her hands and Whoopi appeared to be counting the seconds until the next break. Meryl continued speaking, her tone now measured and instructional, like a teacher addressing someone who had missed the lesson entirely, laying out the difference between meaningful dialogue and public degradation while the studio remained locked in silence. A genuinely meaningful question could have sounded very different. It might have focused on the film's exploration of resilience in the face of hardship and asked how, over such a long career, Meryl had learned to uncover emotional truth in painful or challenging spaces. That would have been demanding, thoughtful, and worthy of discussion. Joy attempted to cut in, but Meryl continued without hesitation. She explained that instead of choosing substance, Joy had opened the segment by attacking her career path and implying that her success was undeserved. That approach, Meryl stated plainly, did not qualify as journalism. It was not even entertaining gossip. It was simply hostility dressed up as commentary, designed to provoke conflict rather than understanding. The effect was total. Joy glanced around the table once more, searching for support, a distraction, anything that might pull her out of the situation. There was none. No one stepped in, no one defended her. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet it barely carried. She insisted that she had been doing this for years and knew how to run an interview. Meryl answered immediately, her tone firm and conclusive. She said that knowing how to do something and doing it well were entirely different matters. Speaking for years did not automatically mean communicating with clarity or purpose. She emphasized the difference between holding opinions and offering insight, between stirring reactions and producing something constructive. Sarah attempted one last time to rescue what little remained of the segment, suggesting that differing perspectives could coexist with mutual respect. Meryl turned to her with a restrained, almost sorrowful smile and agreed that respect was exactly what had been missing. Respect for the craft, respect for the guest, and respect for the audience who tuned in expecting a thoughtful exchange rather than a verbal ambush. Those viewers, she said, deserved better than what had unfolded. That was the moment when Joy's remaining composure finally collapsed. She lashed out, accusing Meryl of believing herself superior to everyone else and hiding behind polished speeches. Meryl rose again, but this time there was no anger in her expression. What showed instead was disappointment. She said quietly that she did not believe she was better than anyone, but she did believe everyone carried a responsibility to rise above their worst instincts. On that day, Joy had chosen not to do so and was now attempting to shift responsibility for that choice onto someone else. Meryl gathered her bag and turned toward the camera for the last time. She apologized to the viewers at home, explaining that what should have been a conversation about art and storytelling had turned into something far uglier. That outcome, she said, had never been her intention when she accepted the invitation. Joy made one final attempt to reassert control, suggesting that perhaps Meryl should reconsider appearing on a program that asked hard questions. Meryl paused at the edge of the set and responded with devastating calm. She said the real tragedy was not the act of asking difficult questions, but the belief that what had happened that day qualified as questioning at all. She explained that real journalism required curiosity, preparation, and respect for both the subject and the audience, and none of those qualities had been present. As Meryl walked off the set, the sharp sound of her heels echoed across the studio floor. The silence left behind felt overwhelming. Joy remained seated, her face drained of color, her hands shaking slightly as the reality of what had just occurred settled in. The full weight of public humiliation pressed down on her, unavoidable and unmistakable. Whoopi Goldberg looked straight into the camera, her expression revealing more than words ever could about how the veteran host felt in that moment on The View. She calmly announced a break, and the cameras finally cut away. When the broadcast paused, Joy was left alone with the consequences of her own behavior and the knowledge that millions of viewers had just watched her be thoroughly dismantled by one of the most respected actresses in the industry. The confrontation itself had ended, but its impact lingered far beyond the studio walls. Joy Behar had initiated a battle she could not control and lost it in the most public way possible. In the end, the exchange served as a stark reminder that attempts to tear others down often expose far more about the person delivering the attack than about the person receiving it.